Good afternoon or good evening, everybody, and welcome to another stream. Hope everyone is having a good start to their week, and I thought that we would focus on some more broad UX topics going forward. I've done a lot of Figma, and of course I will continue to do Figma. However, I was thinking about it, and I realized I'm not doing a ton in the way of usability or user experience in a broad sense. And so that is what we are going to focus on today, and we're going to start with some usability heuristics. And I have some slides here, put together a slide deck in Figma, as I usually do, and I'm going to go through the 10 usability heuristics found on the Nielsen Norman Group website. It's the preeminent site for all things UX, UI, and they have a well-referenced list of usability heuristics, and so I'm going to tackle each one of those, give examples of each, and for each one of these usability heuristics, I tried to find real world, that is to say, I tried to find non-digital representations of what these heuristics might look like in order to give a more well-rounded understanding of each topic. And let's see here. Well, let's go ahead and start with what are heuristics, because it's an interesting word that you may not have heard before, and it's from the Greek for I know, or I see, or I perceive, something like that, I believe is the etymology. And these days, in modern jargon, it means basically rules of thumb, or as NNG puts it on their website, broad rules of thumb. And Nielsen Norman Group also points out that these are not meant to be specific usability guidelines, and so these are more just things to bear in mind when you are creating a product or you're working on a project or whatever your workload may look like. And of course, if there are any questions about any of these heuristics, go ahead and drop them in the Twitch chat or send me a message on Skype. I have both open on a second laptop to my left here. And I also found this image. There's tons of images online, of course, if you go to Google image search and just search for heuristics. But I found this one that I rather like, and it's sort of a bit of an abstract way of looking at heuristics, but I'm not exactly sure what short-term solutions means regarding heuristics. The website I got this from isn't exactly UX based. However, it does point out that heuristics include mental shortcuts and speed up decision making. And indeed, there are plenty of mental shortcuts that you'll see in the following slides. And it also, having heuristics helps speed up decision making for the user, so they're able to make maybe not better informed choices, but they're able to understand what's going on a bit better. And so without any more ado, let's go ahead and go to the second slide in the slide deck here. And the first usability heuristic is visibility of system status. And so the way I formatted each one of these slides is the bold text you see below the headline, I guess the subhead, is the name of the heuristic that I got from Nielsen Norman Group, and then in quotes is another way to think about it, or different phrasing that sort of means the same thing. So if it's not clear what I have here written in the subhead, another way to think about it would be what's here in the quotation marks. And so, visibility of system status, which is another way of thinking about letting the user know what the system is doing and giving feedback about the status of the system. And there are, you see this all, well, you ought to see this all over the place, and in digital products as well as more tangible products that you may encounter. And so, I guess starting from the left here, we see the ever-present loading screen. And dots are popular. You might also just see a progress bar with a percentage of how much is loaded, or you might see any permutation of that. And good on the designer for also including the text here that says loading, because a lot of the, as you will see, or one thing to bear in mind when we are looking at all these heuristics is a lot of these are cultural, and what makes sense to one culture, the heuristic might not make sense to another culture, or it might mean something completely different. And so, especially if you're developing products for an international audience, you need to be cognizant of what may or may not be appropriate, or what may or may not be misconstrued or misunderstood. And so you'll need to be sensitive to that when you're creating your products. And so below that, we have, these are meant to be buttons. I'm not sure if that came out abundantly clear. I could have given them like a 50% corner radius or something like that, but these two are meant to be buttons. And we can see that, or I guess I should have written on click. If we click add to cart, this first button here, the micro copy, and micro copy is the text that's written in small elements like this button here. The micro copy might change to added to cart. And this would be helpful in a scenario where, well, let me ask you this. How often have you engaged with software, be it an app or something on the desktop, or you're at an e-commerce site, or basically you're engaging with something with the screen, and you are trying to select an option or tell the software to perform an action, and you tap the button and then nothing happens, and there's no indication that something is happening on the screen. It just, like, the screen hasn't changed at all, and so you continue to tap, thinking maybe, oh, I didn't tap it the first time, or maybe the tap target's small, so you might tap a different area, looking for some sort of response from the system. And only to find out later on, after you exhaust all of your energy on tapping, that you added, 500 shirts to a shopping cart, or you performed an action many more times than you intended to. And that can be avoided by giving users a indication of what's going on behind the scenes. And so in this scenario, having buttons change their microcopy, that's becoming a bit more popular these days, which I'm a fan of. And in the middle two here, we have two images that represent system status that you might see when you're not looking at a screen, when you're engaging in more tangible activities. The first one being driving, of course. And we have this image of 3 stoplights, and each stoplight represents, with not only color but also order. These, at least in the United States, your street signals or your lights they're always going to be in the same order. The reason for that is users, or in this case drivers, who may have an ocular issue or a vision perception issue, possibly color blindness of one type or another, may have a difficult time distinguishing between, let's say, red and yellow, or yellow and green. And so by having the lights always in the same order, even if a driver, can't tell what color they're looking at, they would have memorized the order that the lights appear in, and so they won't make any inadvertent traffic problems. And so this indicates to all users what the traffic light is doing, how the system is working. And another thing that you may see is if there's ever an issue with the traffic light, let's say there's a power issue or something along those lines, you might see just all 3 blinking, or something like that, which would indicate to drivers that let's say 4-way intersection that's usually controlled by a light has turned into a 4-way stop, and everyone just needs to take their turn and pay extra close attention. And so these are all indicators of the status of the system. It gives all the users involved an idea of what's going on, and that is sort of a similar situation that we see to this bottom middle image here. This is of a stove, or a range, or whatever you may call it in your area. And as we can see here, this I picked it. It was actually strangely difficult to find a decent photo for this. We see right here, it might be difficult to read the text, but it says element on, and element refers to the heating element, which is going to either be the coil, or if it's a flat top range, it's going to be the element that's below the sort of glassy surface. And this indicates to users who are cooking or may want to temporarily put something on top of the range that the heating, at least one of the heating elements, possibly all four or however many heating elements the stove has, there's heat on the surface, and so that's this little indicator LED here is for safety as well as to prevent harm, which I guess is also safety. And so anyone who sees this would know not to accidentally put their hand on the stove or put something flammable on the stove or anything like that. It informs the user that there is part of this part of the range is hot, is going to be very warm to the touch and possibly dangerous. And so this is both the this image here of the range and the stoplight images all have to do with safety. And you'll very frequently, when safety is involved or caution needs to be taken, we'll absolutely see instances of system status just to protect everyone as far as health and lawsuits are concerned. And then on the right here, we have an image of YouTube as it is loading. And this, it would have been nice to attach a GIF because there's sort of a left to right shimmer effect. At least that's what it looks like on my phone. And this indicates, along having the sort of the skeleton here along with the shimmering effect, indicates to the user that something's being loaded. And it's not that's not exactly the case. I forget exactly what this is called, but in UI this is called the skeleton. And YouTube, for example, the servers load the skeleton automatically, and then it's not as though it just starts to fill in data. Like it doesn't know, for example, that this, let's say that this is a title of a video, it doesn't know that this title is 2 1/3 lines long. It's giving an approximation of what it's going to look like. And so I wouldn't call it dark UI pattern because it's not trying to, I don't know, that's sort of a tricky one. It is deceptive in a way. However, there's no malice behind it whatsoever. It's another way of giving an idea of what the system status sort of looks like behind the screen, I almost said. And so once all the data loads, then this image or this image placeholder right here will have the YouTube title card, and there will be the avatar or the user image here on the left in the circle, and the actual title will take up the space. And so there are many ways of indicating loading states and other states that inform the user of what's going on behind the scenes and other methods of feedback. And so let's move to the next heuristic here. We are looking at the match between system and the real world, and that is to say, speak the user's language. And careful watchers of the stream will notice that some of these images will appear more than once, and often these heuristics, the Venn diagram between one heuristic and another might have significant overlap, but not significant enough to make them one heuristic. And so if you pay close attention, you might see that there are relationships between several heuristics, and speaking the user's language will come up sort of in a roundabout way in a couple slides from now. And so what match between system and the real world means is that you want to design components or have a site architecture or any number of things that you could design as a UX professional. You want them to mirror as closely as they can a real-world equivalent of whatever the product or the project may be for. And so, and that can take many forms, of course. And as I have here on the left side, this is an icon that, again, I grabbed mostly all these from either Google image search or just taking screenshots earlier today. And so you might see this icon, which is a printer. You might see this in a word processing application, such as Google Docs, and or X, or any number of other word processing documents, or basically anything that you're editing in. You might print a PDF or print a picture off the internet. The printer icon is also, it's a shorthand for the command to print, and it matches the real world equivalent of, in this case, it would be an inkjet printer. And this middle image here, I snagged this from, this has to be Amazon. Yeah, so I took a screenshot of Amazon earlier today, and this is on the mobile version. And as we can see here, I'm glad that they included a label with their icon. Always label your icons. And as we see here, we see a rather stylized image of a shopping cart, and then we have the number of items in the cart here, sort of in the basket, which the more I look at this, the more I'm torn about as to whether or not I like this design. It's very clever. It's very cute. I like that the items are physically in the cart, like the number of items are physically in the cart, because that's where they would be. And so I think that's very clever design on their choice, or on their part. I wonder, I can't help but wonder how this would look if there were a triple-digit number of items in the cart. Maybe the font gets smaller to accommodate, or, well, I'm sure they thought of that. But in any event, this is how a cart is made into an icon, and it represents shopping in real life. When you push around a cart at the market, of course, your items go in the cart, and so this is reflective of what one might see in the real world. And on the right-hand side here, we have the cursor, and we have the sort of pointing finger indicator, pointing finger cursor whenever if you're browsing a website and you mouse over a link, your cursor will change. Web designers, they can choose to have the cursor change to something else. It could be, well, it could be any number of things. You can control what cursor is displayed on mouse hover. However, it's generally not a good idea to do so. It vastly decreases accessibility. However, this is a bit of an example of matching system in real world. So the arrow, of course, has no real world, or at least not one I can think of off the top of my head. It has no real world equivalent. Because we're in the real world and we touch and we interact with things, have hands for the most part. However, this icon, or this cursor right here of the pointing finger, of sort of maybe the tapping finger, the precursor to the tap, because this icon hasn't changed in ages, indicates that there is selectability. And when I say selectability, I mean interactivity available with whatever this cursor happens to be on top of, whether it be a link or possibly some other sort of control that the user can alter or make the system perform some sort of action. And so by switching between these two cursor types on a website, for example, you are, and by giving it more of a human look to the cursor, it gives more of an indication that something is available. However, this doesn't have the most, I'm thinking this, obviously, and I'm pretty sure this is from the Microsoft Windows. I'm positive that the people who came up with these icons, specifically or keep saying icons, these cursors, specifically the one on the right, people in suits spend months and months and months in boardrooms coming up with just the right cursor, and so I'm sure a lot of research went into this. However, I'm not sure how accessible this might be to someone who is not overly familiar with the internet. This, even though it is less of an abstraction than the arrow, it is still somewhat abstract, and so new users to the internet might have a bit of an issue at first understanding what this is for. However, since it's so widely used, it's fairly well understood at this point. And let's see here, at the bottom left, we have a selection of skeuomorphic buttons, and these are incredibly, just very well designed buttons, and to the point where it almost looks like a photograph, although everything is just slightly too perfect. And we can, I could imagine that buttons like these, and we also have a dial and a toggle and a slider, elements like these, one might encounter these in I was about to say Audacity, but I don't even know if that's a thing anymore. Music production software, something like Pro Tools or Fruity Loops on the less expensive side of things might see buttons that look like this, and these buttons are meant, or in that scenario, would be meant to mimic what an audio engineer may encounter in real life, so to speak, working with actual hardware, actual devices. And so this gives by giving similarity, it lets the user be a little bit more. It creates the idea of similarity, and if you're accustomed to using real hardware and components, this might be an easier way to symbolize what's going on behind the scenes. And so this mirrors the real world pretty closely. And then on the right here, this is an iWatch. I don't know what generation this is. However, we can see here, ooh, I can zoom in this mode. Very cool. And so if I zoom in, we can see that this individual has set, and forgive me if I use the wrong vocabulary here, I don't have a smart device. This individual has set the default watch style, or has set the watch style to a classic analog style. And so which in an earlier era would have definitely represented the type of clocks and timepieces that users may be more accustomed to seeing. Possibly, back in the day when grandfather clocks were more of a thing, they would often have faces like this, usually with, I guess, maybe Gothic or Roman numerals instead of the Arabic numerals you see here. However, this corresponds to an earlier timepiece style that many people might be familiar with. I know certainly analog is going the way of the dodo these days. However, it's still very much in use in many places. And then at the bottom, and I used this word earlier, I wrote skeuomorphism with an exclamation point at the end for some reason. And we see the same word, we see the adjective of the verb skeuomorphic right here. And skeuomorphism is an interesting concept, and we're encountering like true skeuomorphism, or we're encountering skeuomorphism less often these days. It was a bigger deal maybe about 20 years ago when tappable screens were sort of a new thing, and tappable screens have been around for a long time. I mean to say, when tappable screens were first introduced to the public at a price point that a lot of people could afford, skeuomorphism was a big thing. And what skeuomorphism is, creating digital representations of things that not putting it very well. Let's the best example, and I couldn't fit it on that one page, is we'll go to iPhone. Ooh, can't spell. Probably can't spell anyway. There we go, iPhone skeuomorphism. And so if we look at there we go. Okay, so yeah, this is a screenshot of a very early edition of an iPhone compared to a later edition of the iPhone. And if we look here, we see they're not all the same apps. Like I don't see Passbook on the screen over here, but we have the older app icons on the left, and this screenshot here is the older iOS, and we have a newer version, not the newest, but a newer version here on the right. And as we can see here, many of the icons are modeled after what a user would see in real life. And I think most, or the off-sided example here is the newsstand, and that looks exactly like a wooden newsstand that you might see traveling or walking around a big city. We have news sellers, and the notes here, that looks just like a normal yellow pad that you might write on. Maybe I think it's called a legal pad, possibly. And we can see on the right we have a version. Actually, it's nice that these two are right next to each other. So as time rolls on, it becomes slightly more abstract. We still have the horizontal lines, and we have the, I don't know what that would be called. But we have this bit at the top where all the papers stapled together, and it becomes a little bit more abstract over time. And then we can see, looking at the newsstand icon here and comparing it to here, there's almost it's clear from both what both are trying to accomplish. However, the newsstand icon on the right does away completely with the literal newsstand that we see this icon representing here. They haven't settings hasn't really undergone a lot of change. As we can see here, it's still very much gear based. I actually kind of prefer this earlier iconography to the newer one. Not a fan of this gears within gears system we have going on. And we can see that stocks is basically the same. They just got rid of that glassy look that you see all over the place. Glassy went away. And we can see a move away from more literal interpretations of what an icon stands for to, some of the time, more abstract versions. For example, the camera didn't really change too much. Well, it changed a lot. It sort of went in the opposite direction, I guess I should say. So camera, this would be the lens of a camera, and this is just an icon of a camera. And so this calendar, for example, right here, this reminds me of one of those sort of desk calendars that you flip one day at a time that you might see on an executive's desk. And we just have the same idea here. However, it's the same level of abstraction, I would say, but it's just more flat designy, which is the direction that Apple was headed in for a while. And then a big move from more literal interpretation to more abstract interpretation would be the photos icon right here. So as we see here, it's just a photo of what I'm guessing is a sunflower, and then over here on the right, it still sort of looks like a flower. If you didn't have these side by side, or at least in a comparative view like we have here, it may not be clear that this is a flower, but I believe that this is what they were going for based on what we see here. And so let's go to, because I don't want to do a bad, can't spell at all. I don't want to do a terrible job. Let's check out what Wiki has to say about skeuomorph. And let's see here. Oh yeah, with the advent of computer systems in the 1980s, skeuomorph is used to characterize the many old-fashioned icons utilized in graphic user interfaces. And that reminds me of a wonderful video by JJ McCullough, a YouTuber, who talks about the curious use of old-time iconography in icons that we still see today. For example, the diskette. This isn't used much anymore, but the diskette as being the icon or the shorthand for saving, and so we don't see that too much anymore. And so yeah, a skeuomorph or skeuomorph is a derivative object that retains ornamental design cues from structures that were necessary in the original. And so with that phrasing in mind, think back to let's see here. Think back to this newsstand icon that we have on the old iOS. And let's see here, jump back to Figma. And and of course, I probably did not do a great job explaining what skeuomorphism is, and indeed, one could probably spend an entire stream explaining what it is and when to use it and when not to use it. However, in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and continue to the next slide here. And so the next heuristic is user control and freedom. And in other words, allow users to backtrack from mistakes and let them feel in control. And I believe on the Nielsen Norman Group's website for the 10 usability heuristics, they had an image of an emergency exit, and that is phrasing that they like to use quite frequently when describing what this heuristic is all about. And essentially, the idea is users are going to, I have a photo behind this one. I didn't mean to mask that off. Users are going to err. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to slip up. And do not punish them for it. And no matter how proficient you may or may not be in any activity, whether it be designing a responsive product in Figma or operating an automobile, at some point again, regardless of skill level, you're going to have some problem, or you're going to do something that you did not mean to do for whatever reason. Either because and there's two types of errors, and I thought about, I had a line of text here originally that went into the two different types of errors, but I thought that was a bit too in the weeds. But since I did mention it, there are, at least according to Don Norman, two types of errors. There's the slip and the mistake, and I'm painting with a very broad brush here. Slips are errors that are caused by negligence or not paying attention, and mistakes are errors that are caused by having an incorrect goal. And those are the two different ways to, and again, that's another concept that one could go into at length. However, the point here is to understand that users are going to err. They're going to slip. They're going to make mistakes. We all do it. And the idea is do not punish them for doing so. And the best examples of that are having undo buttons and having redo buttons. And I have here I found this screenshot, and OS X always likes to double check, and it likes to ask when you are deleting or permanently deleting files, or permanently deleting files, or emptying the trash can or recycle bin, whatever it's called in this operating system. It's just called trash. And by offering users control, it allows them to, and this will come up later, I use this screenshot twice. By allowing the users to feel in control, it gives them a sense of sort of ownership of the process that they're undertaking. And I guess I have another screenshot that I took earlier, and I believe this was from Skype. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this was from Skype. And so let's say that you were typing a message to someone, or just in general on a messaging application, be it Slack, Discord, Skype, anything like that. And you may have misphrased something or made a typographical error, giving users the option to either, in this case, you can completely remove, get rid of the message, or edit the message, allows them to backtrack a bit. It allows them to edit the work that they've done, or in other words, it allows them to rectify any mistake that they may have inadvertently created or performed. And so by giving, all three of these have the idea in common that it lets users feel that they are in control. And that is an interesting idea in and of itself, user control. Of course, you want to give users as much control as you possibly can, because even if it's on a low psychological level, users they like being in control. They like feeling like they're in control, regardless of whether or not they actually are. It could be an elusive feeling of control. And of course, with any product, users aren't going to be, most of the time, are going to be 100% in control, especially because there are many constraints in place. However, creating the illusion of control is often more than enough to help users feel empowered when they're using software, when they're using an app or a website, or whatever the case may be. And so, again, by allowing users control over actions that they've already made, or warning them, well, actually that comes up later, by giving users control over actions that they have already made, such as the undo or possibly redo buttons, we give agency to the user, so to speak, when they're using your product. And let's see here. Yes. Excuse me. So for this next heuristic, we are talking about consistency and standards. And in other words, users have expectations. Don't force users to relearn. And by that I mean don't force them to, don't reinvent the wheel. If there's already an established way of doing something, if there's a convention in place, don't try to come up with a fancy new way of doing it. It may be the case that your new way of doing it is better than the current methodology. However, it's not going to fly trying to force that down users' throats or making it so that that's the only way to engage with a product or to perform an action. It's better to maybe introduce that slowly. Anyway, the point is, if that's not something that you're trying to do, to introduce some newfangled way of doing something, stick to what users already know. And if you're familiar with one of the laws of UX, which I intend on doing a stream on some point soon here, you may remember one of the first laws that UX professionals learn is called Jacob's Law. And Jacob's Law, to summarize, is users spend, 99% of their time using a device on other people's websites. And so all of the information that they have, all of their experience, is going to be based on what they see on other websites. And so when they come to your website, they have expectations of what to expect. Be that common, icons need to be familiar with what they're used to seeing, and certain elements need to appear in places that they expect them to appear. And I have two examples of that right here. I took a screenshot of both Amazon and Google in sort of a mobile viewport in my Chrome browser. And as we can see, there are several similarities between the two of these. And I could have chosen many more websites aside from these two, but I decided just to keep with these two because these are two websites that users may be fairly familiar with. And so to begin with, if you take a moment and just think about the similarities in what you see between these two headers, and these are at the top of the screen. Okay, so what we see, I guess we could start with the left. So they made use, both Google and Amazon made use of the Hamburger menu, which is this triple horizontal line icon that you see right here, which is going to hide categories or options or any number of things that need to be sort of stowed away that aren't appropriate to show on a mobile viewport because it just simply takes up too much space. And then going to the right, we see the site ID. And so here we just see Google front and center, and then a little bit to the right of the Hamburger menu, we see the site ID. We have Amazon Prime, or Amazon Plus Prime, I suppose, in my scenario. We have the logos right here. And then in Google, we see I don't know if they still call them avatars, but we have my user image right here. And we don't see exactly the same thing here on Amazon, mostly because the Google products, so Google, YouTube, basically anything that allows Google login, will be able to display your user image. However, that is not the case with Amazon. However, I was logged in with Amazon, and so it has a version of the same thing. The actions would be the same if I were to tap on either this little image here or this image plus label here. It would take me to a user page, or possibly take me to settings, something like that, something having to do with my account. And then, of course, there is no equivalent of the shopping cart icon up here in Google, because this is just a screenshot of, I think, Google image search, so there would be nothing to purchase there. And then below that, we have the search form. We have the control here at the very least. You'll notice that neither of these controls, or inputs, as you might want to call them, neither of these controls have a label. And if you've watched any of my previous streams, you may know about my feeling about labeling your forms or labeling your controls. However, that's often not done in mobile viewport for some reason. And so we do have here, we have some placeholder text that says search Amazon. Again, please don't use placeholder text. And we have, they chose two different areas for it. On Amazon, we see the magnifying glass, which is the icon for search. We have the search icon here on the right, and on Google, we have it over here on the left. And again, I'm sure the teams at both Google and Amazon have spent, say hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to figure out exactly which icon is best and where exactly to put it. So I'm not going to this questioning their design choices is outside the scope. It's outside my purview as far as this stream is concerned. However, you'll altogether you'll notice several similarities in what we're seeing here. And so Google and Amazon are in a way kind of tastemakers for the rest of, well, Amazon's sort of a trend leader as far as what we'll see in e-commerce sites, and Google is the tastemaker for overall searching, and yeah, I'll say searching. And then also with that we have this example of, and I wanted to find a less, I don't know if this is meant to be humorous, but I wanted to find a less humorous version of this. But as I said a moment ago, we have the hamburger menu here on the left side on both Amazon and Google, and there are, as we can see here, at the very least, 5 permutations of the hamburger menu, and so we see the old classic here on the left, but there's also the Donner, or the Donner menu, the bento menu, the kebab menu, and the meatballs menu. So we have sort of a food theme going on here as far as this iconography is concerned. And I'm not sure what it is about user experience designers, but we certainly love our food puns. And it's just, I'm thinking about, not entirely sure why I included this graphic exactly. However, be aware that you'll want to, not to go off on a tangent on hamburger menus, but be mindful when you're using such an icon to hide information. If a user, for example, is most familiar with the hamburger menu, if they go to your website and see the bento or the kebab or the meatballs, they might be slightly confused as to what it's for, and that might introduce frustration or aggravation on the user that was completely unintended. And so just something to be aware of. And these two right here are these examples at the bottom they're examples of external consistency. And external consistency means your product, or external consistency is consistency with products that are outside of your own, or the type of, or the products that your users spend 99% of their time with. And so you'll want to adhere to external conventions as best you can. For example, having search at the top, or having access to if you're working on an e-commerce site, having your shopping cart icon with a number of items in the cart at the top right, or at the very least at the top, search at the top, user account information shortcut at the top, same thing with your hamburger menu. All these things more or less have homes where they're supposed to be, and so you'll want to make sure that your designs are consistent with what the user is going to see on any external site or any external resource. The flip side to that, or another sort of consistency to take in mind, is the internal consistency. Very important. And so what internal consistency is the consistency between each page or screen, depending on what you're working on, of your product or your project. You need to have sort of reliable design between each screen. And to aid in doing this correctly, you may develop a style guide, or you may have a design system in place. And as we can see here, this is sort of I'm not sure whose this is, but someone's project's style guide. And so as we see here, we have information on primary and secondary colors to be used for the background. We have established text styles, including all of your headings, your bold italics, and your strike-throughs, paragraph text. And then we also have color swatches here, as well as some UI patterns. We have some buttons down here. And by developing, or at least, by developing your own UI kit, or using someone else's UI kit and sticking with it screen after screen, page after page, you're going to create a cohesive, consistent experience all throughout your product. The last thing that you want, or not the last thing, but one thing that you definitely want to avoid, is having a user, who's maybe on your homepage or on any page or screen on your product, and going to another page, and then everything looks different. All of a sudden, you're using a different font family or font face, or different colors all over the place, and now what elements had certain meaning before now have different meanings, or if the meaning hasn't changed, at least the visual presentation of them has changed, and that can be jarring for users, and that can be very confusing, and it may, depending on what you're working on, that may reduce trust. And for example, if you're working on an e-commerce solution or an e-commerce app or website, and one page isn't consistent with the next, that may very well reduce the feeling of trustworthiness, and you might see conversion fall off because of that. And so that's something you want to keep in mind. You want to be internally consistent. Each screen or each page or whatever it is that you're working on needs to be consistent with the style guide or the design system you have set up. And on top of that, the broad decisions that you make about where to place certain elements or which icons to use need to be consistent externally with what users are likely to expect. And so always keep Jacob's law in mind when you're thinking about your internal consistency and your external consistency. And so next we have yes, it's our old friend, the OS 10 screenshot down here again. We were talking about error prevention, and error prevention is maybe slightly misleading in the way that's stated. And another way of thinking about this is eliminate avenues for errors. And bear in mind that there is generally, broadly speaking, you're not going to be able to eliminate all errors. And that's going to be more and more true as your product, that's going to scale with the complexity of your product. The more screens, the more pages, the more functions, features that a product has, the more chance for error there's going to be. That's just the fact of the matter. And it's not something to necessarily worry about, but it's something to be mindful of. And so by reducing situations where a user could make an error, be that a slip or a mistake, you're going to make the experience a lot smoother for the user. And in addition to that, let's say you work for a larger company who may have a product support team, an entire body of people whose only job is to field calls or emails or other forms of complaints from the users. By preventing errors in as much as you can, you're going to reduce the workload for them, which is in turn will not only make the user happier overall, hopefully, but it's also going to reduce the financial burden. It's going to reduce the cost involved with having to deal with customer issues. And so I have a couple of examples of what error prevention may look like. Excuse me. And so one way to prevent errors, and I'll zoom in so we can see the text a little bit more. This is a screenshot I took from Amazon earlier today, and suggestions is one way. Suggesting to the user what they might be looking for, or a suggestion for any other thing, would definitely help reduce errors, because the user might not exactly know what they're looking for. For example, if I had something in my mind that I wanted to purchase, but maybe I couldn't exactly think of what it was called, or I didn't know exactly how to phrase it, but I just started typing in a search field anyway. By typing the word audio, Amazon came up with, and I'm guessing this is based on popularity, but Amazon came up with some suggestions to help me out. And so not only does that save me time as a user, it also reduces any mistakes I might make. And these mistakes, like having a weird search query that wouldn't return the results I was looking for, isn't exactly the worst thing in the world. Like, it's not like a system error, or it's not it's typing in the wrong query is not going to prevent me from shopping. It's just going to waste my time. However, and this is about the only screenshot I could think to come up with for talking about suggestions. But by having suggestions, you assist the user in coming up with the right goal or the right task to accomplish. And let's see here. Here's another good one right here. And I wanted to get a picture from or a screenshot from Gmail. However, I did not do that. And so this is this might be an older edition of Outlook, I'm thinking, based on the UI patterns I'm seeing here. So this is an attachment reminder modal or pop-up that you might see. Have you ever composed an email and maybe the last line of the email prior to the ending remark might say something like, please see attached. And you have an intent on, or you intend to attach a CV or a resume or a cover letter or a photograph from a birthday or a vacation or anything like that, an attachment. And you mentioned the word attachment in the body of the email. The email application or Gmail sees that you mentioned attachment, or it possibly sees the string, please see attachment, and it knows, this user is about to send an email, and there's a very high likelihood that there should be an attachment with the email that's going to be sent to another user. And so if you've ever typed an email and say, please see attached, and then completely forgot to attach anything and press enter or press send, Gmail, or in this case, I'm guessing this is Outlook, may prompt you and say, whoa, it looks like you may have forgotten to attach a file. And would you like to send it anyway or don't send? And it's interesting here. I don't know if this is the default or if the user, whoever took the screenshot, put the focus on the don't send, but it would be interesting. It would be a good error prevention case to make the default button don't send, just as sort of an extra fallback from the user having to end up sending two emails, one with an apology and the attachment. And so this is smart design right here. And again, you'll also see this in Gmail, which I keep mentioning Gmail. It's the email app, or it's the email that I use. And anytime I try to send something without an attachment, it complains to me about that. And it's saved me many times before. So good on you, Google. And let's see here. And okay, so this is a bit of a stretch as to what we're looking for error prevention, because as we can see here in this Google search, I searched for hamburger when Google thinks I meant to just search for just regular hamburger, and clearly I had menus on the mind here. And so this, as we can see here, this took place after the fact. There was nothing prior to the search being requested that would have informed me that my search query was wrong, outside of the squiggly red line that would appear underneath a misspelled word. And for all I know, it wasn't there at all, or if there was, I just ignored it. And so after the fact, it said, oh, did you mean hamburger? And this it did not prevent me from making the error of searching for a misspelled word. However, it definitely allows me to correct the error that I had made. And because this was such a low-grade error, I'm going to count this in the category of error prevention. And let's see here. So in this screenshot here, I also took this one earlier today. This is from a web app called Calendly. And Calendly allows you to set up a calendar for meetings of any specific type, or of any type. And so I was setting up some Zoom meetings for a usability test that I intend on doing this week and the next, and I needed it to inform Calendly of the dates, and then after that the times I would be available to do the testing. And it may be difficult to see exactly what's going on here, but today is July 19th, 2022. I selected as the first day that I would be available as June 18th. And when I clicked 18, the CTA, the primary button right here that says apply, became disabled. It's not going to allow me to say that I'm ready to start receiving meetings or schedules for a meeting on the 18th, because that's in the past, and that simply doesn't make sense. And so Not a huge fan of disabling buttons or disabling any pattern without informing the user why. However, so ideally there would have been some text down here, sort of below this frame, that would have informed me why. I know why because I took the screenshot on purpose. However, a constraint was set up wherein I can no longer apply this range of dates because one of the dates is in the past. And so it disallows me from creating an error in the first place. It simply doesn't allow me to make the error. And so that goes with this line of text I have up here. It says, constraints may help prevent errors from occurring. And by setting up a constraint, I wasn't able to hit apply, which would have created an error. And so Calendly prevented me from doing that. And then lastly, we have another example of a constraint, and we have this OS 10 screenshot right here. It says, are you sure you want to delete bin, which is, I'm guessing, a very important directory. And so we have a couple of things going on here. First of all, the headline text here, are you sure you want to delete bin, is very clear in what it's asking. There's no second guessing about what OS 10 wants to make sure of. And it also repeats the name of the directory or the file or whatever bin might be in this case. It repeats it back to me, which is going to be that's recognition over remembering, which we're going to see in a future slide here. And it looks like the default, or the button that has focus given to it automatically, is the cancel button. And so, for example, if this were me and I was accidentally, I don't know, if I accidentally took bin to the trash or otherwise tried to delete it, and then I try to empty the trash, OS 10 would say, hey, you sure? Are you sure about that? And it looks like the focus is default on cancel. And so if I just wasn't paying attention, if I was typing rapidly and I hit enter, it would cancel it. So this has to be an action that's done with intent. I purposefully have to either click delete or tab over to delete. And so it makes it sort of, there's an additional step of difficulty when it comes to deleting, which may sound annoying, especially if I intend to delete something. However, I'm sure, well, I don't want to assume on anyone, but I would be willing to, well, I don't bet, but I'd be willing to bet that you may have in the past accidentally deleted something that you did not mean to. I certainly have. In my 20 plus years of using computers, I've deleted all sorts of stuff I didn't mean to, and it's having this as a precaution, as a constraint against me doing something foolish is very useful. And so this is an additional step for eliminating or for helping to eliminate errors. Again, bear in mind that people are still going to make mistakes. They're going to make errors, slips, mistakes, and so you can't fully prevent errors, and so this phrasing right here is a bit misleading. However, you can do, there is a lot you can do as a designer to help minimize the errors. This might be better understood as error minimization. And so something to bear in mind, and constraints go a long way. Next, we have recognition rather than recall, which is something I just mentioned using the wrong words, but I mentioned it referring to this OS 10 modal showing you the name of the file or the directory that you're intending to delete, and that'll, I think, come up one more time. But this heuristic is recognition rather than recall, which is sort of a it's an interesting way of phrasing this. But in other words, it's easier to be reminded than to remember. And the idea here is we want to, I guess, another name for this entire slide deck could be don't make the user think, which is, again, one of the base principles of UX design is don't make me think, don't make the user think. Props to Steve Krug for that exact phrasing. And so you don't want to put too much of a burden on the user when it comes to remembering things, especially when it's screen to screen to screen to screen to screen. If it's a multi-step operation, having to remember even one thing going through multiple screens, by the end, you might have forgotten what you started for or why you began a process. And that's especially true if you're trying to remember multiple things. And a good way to think about this that you might encounter frequently online is the shopping cart. And so next time you're shopping online, pay pay attention, especially if you're intending to be a student of e-commerce. Pay attention to the checkout process. And you'll notice that the most popular sites, Amazon included here, will on nearly every screen that you go through in the checkout process, they have a description, or this is a pretty decent description. It's a pretty decent product description of every item that you are about to pay for. And the idea is, by not having to, it reduces the mental burden on the user. So you can instead concentrate on more important things like making sure that you type in your credit card information or your billing address correctly. And so by having this information visible to you, you can recognize rather than having to recall, because it's, as it says here, it's easy to be reminded. It's easier to be reminded than having to remember, for example, everything that's in your cart. And I took this apparently stock image of a grocery cart. It's just stocked up with all the most stereotypical stock image food you can think of. When you're shopping, if you have your shopping cart or your trolley and you're in the market, doing some shopping for the week or for the month, you can always see, unless you have like stuff stacked on other stuff, and when you look into your cart or your basket, you can see everything that you intend to purchase. It's clear what you intend to purchase, so you don't. And so it also reduces the burden of having to remember, oh, did I pick up, did I pick up this French bread or this pineapple or this, I guess, olive oil? I don't know what this is, but you can always look down and be reminded of what you already have, and so you don't end up forgetting something at the market. You don't forget the milk, or you don't end up purchasing something you didn't intend to purchase. And so this is sort of an equivalent idea of what you'll see online. And so by reducing the burden for the user, they can focus on more important things, and that may very well let them feel like they're in control of what's going on. And again, remember, all of these are a lot of these are connected in several ways. And so I found I'm not sure what I searched for when I found this, but I thought this was a pretty brilliant thing to do. So this is a bookmark. That's an image of a bookmark that I found. And so we have the elastic band that lets the user know which page they're on. However, there's also this sliding piece of metal with sort of a pointer, a nib at the end, and that tells the user what sentence they were on, or at least what word that they stopped reading at. And so this gives finer control over letting the user. It lets the user more finely understand where they were when they stopped. And so this is reminding the user, rather than if you've if you're reading a book and you stop reading it, or you get up to go do something, you might just put a bookmark in there, or you might dog ear the page you're on, and then when you come back to it, you might spend 20 seconds, especially if it's very dense text with small typeface. You might spend a while trying to figure out exactly where you were, so you can pick up where you left off. And so a clever little piece of metal like this would let you know exactly, or pretty close to exactly, where you were when you stopped reading. And so this is so in that scenario, or in that context, it would be a lot easier, and it would save time to be reminded of where you were, rather than just trying to scan all this, hundreds of words on a page, trying to remember where you were. And this is these two screenshots on the right are from YouTube, and this is the watch history. History is another good way to, it's another good thing to integrate if you're thinking about recognition over recall. If you've ever been to, you're doing a lot of research online, and if you like I have a habit of closing a tab sometimes prematurely. I don't like having too many tabs open, and so I'll close them when I think I'm done with them. And if you don't know, at least on a Mac keyboard, Command-Shift-T brings up the tabs that you've closed in order that you close them. But if you didn't know that, having a history allows you to be reminded of all the things that you looked at, say, today or yesterday or earlier that week. And so it's a lot easier to see a history of what you've been looking at or what you've been searching for, rather than having to remember, oh, what was that really awesome site with all those UX tips, or what was that YouTube, who was that YouTuber I was looking at? And so it takes a mental burden off the user. And this watch history is an example of a history, but there's also browse history. Sometimes you might be able to see a history of the actions that you've taken in maybe a design application, and so you can trace back exactly what steps you took to get to a certain point in a design. And so watch history breaks it down by the day. So what I watched on my MacBook today versus what I watched last Friday. And there's also a pretty interesting feature that YouTube has, which is called Watch Later. And I don't use this as much now as I used to. However, I still think it's fantastic. Watch Later allows you to create sort of a queue of videos that you might not necessarily have time to watch right now, but you intend on watching later. And because very often when you get on YouTube, because YouTube can very often be a time sink. If you see a bunch of videos that you might want to watch, but you don't have time for them right now, you add them to the watch later category. And so YouTube has a queue of videos that you intend to watch, but you haven't watched yet. And so next time you have time, and you sit down and you say, oh, I'm gonna catch up on some of those YouTube videos that I meant to watch. Watch Later can assist you in remembering what those were, rather than you can recognize the ones that you added, rather than having to remember, oh, what was the name of that YouTuber I intended to watch? And so all of these things together are under the umbrella idea of reducing reducing the mental load of having the user trying to remember every little thing. And so it, again, also increases the amount of control that they feel they have. And so it frees their mental capacity up to perform other actions that may be conversion-based, for example. And so you want to assist the user as much as possible. Don't make them think, if at all possible. Next, we have flexibility and efficiency of use. This is definitely one of my favorites. It's difficult to play favorites with heuristics, but another way to think about flexibility and efficiency of use is give users more than one way to accomplish a task. And that one is that there's not too much to explain on this one. It's one of the more straightforward heuristics. And so, as we can see here, I did a search I opened up Google Maps and I went to the Directions tab. And if you're a Google Maps user or possibly another Maps application, you'll notice that at least in Google Maps at the top here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 5 ways, at least listed here, to get to whatever the starting point is to the end point. And so, which is based on icons. So we have car, bus, walking, cycling, or flight. And so when a user engages in or makes use of Google Maps and wants to find directions to somewhere, Google Maps isn't forcing them to, it's not forcing one method of travel. And so by giving multiple popular methods of travel, Google allows flexibility in how it delivers this information to you. And that's also seen here. I wanted to find I ran out of time, but I wanted to find a screenshot or a picture of the user interface that's on the camera that I'm speaking into, which is a Sony ZV-E10. However, this one is pretty close, and I think this might be a Sony. I'm not entirely sure. But as we can see here, this is one of the screens that's on the user interface for a digital camera. And it says here the topic is custom key or dial setting. And on many of your modern DSLRs and mirrorless cameras, you'll have the option to set up custom features or custom attributes. Let's say that you're frequently shooting let's say that you're shooting in a studio all the time, and instead of, every time you turn your camera on, you have to go change all these settings, and you could take, a few minutes to get the settings you really want, and you need to shoot your subject. Then you need to make the most of your time. Well, by having a custom set of settings or a macro setup, you can quickly switch over to that and have all your settings exactly where they need to be, or set to the right thing. And that could be the case. Another way of doing this would be having, maybe if you have an account at a certain at a website, or if you have certain parameters set up the way that you like them, it allows you to do your work more efficiently. If you're always performing, if you're doing a repetitive task in a very specific way, allowing the user to make sure that is possibly their default, or at least giving them the option to perform tasks in that way, again, gives them a big feeling of control. And this screenshot here on the right, this is from FileZilla, which is it's an FTP file transfer protocol client for OS X. And I took this screenshot earlier today. And what I did, as we can sort of barely see here, is just to get the screenshot, I had FileZilla open, and I clicked and dragged a file into a directory at my domain that already existed. And so it said, okay, so it says target file already exists, and then it gives me some prompts, it gives me a prompt as to what it wants me to do in the scenario. And so we have four options for overriding, and we have some if-then statements here, depending on how I want to go forward with having made the decision to drag a file over to the directory. I can, of course, it gives me the option to skip. I can rename the file. And then we have some checkboxes at the bottom below this section here with the radio boxes. And for example, if I were moving a large amount of files, if I were moving an entire directory, and let's say there were hundreds of files there, and I wanted to only overwrite files with the same name if they were of a different size, and I wanted to only apply it to this current queue, so I wouldn't have to sit here and keep pressing the enter key each time for each file. I have this gives me loads of options with how to perform a task like this. And so not only is it efficient, but I have many options for how to accomplish this task. And so when I'm using FileZilla, I feel like I'm more in control when I'm managing the files on the web server. And I do remember that I said I would try to find more tangible, sort of quote-unquote real-life examples of each one of these heuristics, and that wasn't always possible for each one. However, excuse me, I found this image right here, which is what we're meant to focus on here is the radio control that this individual is using in their vehicle. And if you are if you're a driver and you are familiar with the radio controls, you may know that you have multiple ways of choosing or dialing in a radio station based on whatever frequency you're looking for. And so if you are possibly new to an area, or you're on a road trip and you're just scanning through the stations trying to find good reception, you might one way that you can dial through is, of course, using the dial here, which is what this individual is turning a dial to find a good frequency on FM or AM. And then once that is found, these numbered buttons right here, these are the preset buttons. And so if you find a radio station that you really like and you intend on being in that area for a while, but you don't necessarily want to have to dial to it, or if you want to dial away from it, you want to be able to come back to that one quickly, you can hold down, or at least this is how it works in all the vehicles I've ever owned. You can hold down these number buttons, and after a couple of seconds, it'll beep at you, and then your preset will be saved. So even if you dial away from that frequency, from that radio station, you can return to it quickly by pressing that number. And so it's efficient in the sense that if I went to another radio station and I didn't like it, but I want to return to the one I was at originally, I could just press whatever button I had saved the preset to, or and it also gives me more than one way to accomplish the task, in that I could press the button or I could just roam around the dial trying to find something. And so I thought that was a fairly decent example of flexibility and efficiency of use as far as that heuristic is concerned. Next, we have aesthetic and minimal design. And another way of sort of thinking about that is don't make the product any more complicated than it needs to be. And this, the word aesthetic has certainly taken on an interesting life in the last couple of years. And to be specific, I also want to point out that the word design here also goes for copy. It also goes for the text that you have on your product or your project or your website or whatever it is that you may be working on. And so bear in mind, even though I'm using, I don't have a text example here, also bear in mind that this does apply to text. And the idea is you want to give only as much information as you need to for the user, no more, no less. And you need to also understand your audience well enough to know what type of information is appropriate and in what language is the information appropriate. And I believe, let's see here. Yeah, just want to make sure I'm not doubling up on my heuristics here. And so you need to know your audience. And so you need to do plenty of user research, which you should be doing anyway. And so you want to present no more, no less. And that can be very difficult depending on what information you're trying to convey, especially when it comes to, well, not especially, but for example, when it comes to products. If you're working on an e-commerce platform, you want to make sure that you don't inundate the user with so much technical information that they can't make sense of it, and they just get frustrated and they leave your website and go to another retailer who doesn't give them so much information that becomes a burden. But you also want to give them, you don't want to give them so little that it introduces confusion into their mind where they might not be certain whether or not product A is better than product B. And so you want to hit that midpoint, which again could be very difficult. And as far as non-text examples are concerned, let's say another way to think about this is don't go too overboard with your UI patterns or any design elements that you may have in your product or project that you're working on. And it may sound somewhat boring, but I guarantee you constraints are a blessing, as it turns out. You'll want to make something as simple as possible because, again, even though that might make you, the designer, annoyed, or you may think you can make something better by adding more and more and more. You have to stop and think. Well, two big thoughts here. You aren't the user, and that's one of the first things that we learn as UX designers is you are not the user. You have to design for the user. You're not the user. And so to get to know your user, you have to do loads of user research. And the other issue is, I forgot I lost my train of thought there. But you aren't the user. And so you want to just use as little as possible as you can. And I will explain the picture with the pup last. And so this is, I sort of presented this in an odd way, but the images, these are iPods, by the way, if you are not old enough to have owned an iPod when it was in its prime. This image on the left is one of the, I don't know what generation this was, but first or second. And I'll zoom in just a bit here. And so this is an early iPod. And as we can see here, it had the I'm not sure if this is called a click wheel, but it had the click wheel and it had the button in the middle, but it also had 4 additional buttons. Tactile buttons, like hardware buttons, physical buttons. And so we have the menu, next track, previous track, and then play, pause. And on subsequent iterations of this product, we see, interestingly, we have a backlight on this model, but everything else basically stayed the same. It looks like the battery icon changed a little bit there, but that might be a system setting that you can change. In any event, we have what we see on the right here is a simplification of the design. The scroll wheel still does everything that it did on this original model. However, we no longer have individual buttons for menu, previous track, next track, and play pause. Those are built in to the scroll wheel functionality. And we can also see that there were some mild cosmetic differences. It looks like there are two I hesitate to call these vents, but there were two gaps here in the product at the top, which are no longer present in this iteration right here. And so they cleaned up the look a little bit while offering exactly the same functionality, if not possibly more functionality. And so we can see how it gets the same, this iPod on the right gets the same job done. However, it gets it done in a much more minimalized way. And so regardless of whether or not you may like this design on the left a bit more, this is what research at Apple ultimately showed that consumers preferred, is a simplified scroll wheel like the one we have here. And then, of course, eventually, and to be very clear, by no means is the use of the arrows here supposed to, between these two top images and the iPod, oh gosh, I think this is called the shuffle at the bottom. By no means do I mean to indicate that the shuffle took over as, being the next iteration from this iPod right here. This was a completely different product sold alongside this iPod right here. And so the shuffle or the click, I don't remember what it's called, I think it was called shuffle, was sort of the extreme conclusion of minimalism in design. And Apple did enough research to find out that there were some users who enjoyed having an MP3 player or a music player. However, they, for whatever reason, they just never, weight might have been an issue, or for example, joggers or people who exercise a lot, it might have been a bulky device to carry around an iPod like this. And so or users may have very active, otherwise active lifestyles wherein they didn't have time to look at the screen, or they knew what their playlists were, they knew the music they had on the device, and so they didn't need to look at the screen. The screen became irrelevant to them, and so there was enough demand in the market for Apple to introduce this version of the iPod, which I didn't. It may look strange if you've never seen one of these before, but I owned one of these back in the day, and I thought it was just the bee's knees. I did not crop this picture. This is what the product looks like, and user research showed that this is what some customers wanted. This is what they want versus need. This is what became of user. This is what happened after a lot of user research. And so, but also bear in mind that this was for a very specific customer. This is for a customer who may or may not have already been in Apple's ecosystem, but was after something specifically like this. And so in this scenario, in this context of this product, this was the appropriate amount of minimalism for this product. And for this iPod right here, at this iteration point, this was exactly the amount of minimization, and these are the aesthetic choices that Apple took. And as their sales figures pointed out, this was the right direction to take. But of course, they did loads of user research on that, so it wasn't based on a guess. And on the same topic of music players, I wanted to show what, just to give an example that aesthetic and minimal design is not going to be the same for every product, and the idea or the what it looks like for one product doesn't necessarily mean it's going to look like that for another product. And I took the screenshot right here, and this is of a modern, it may look older because of its size, but this is a very modern, I assure you, very modern, and for that matter, very expensive audio player. And this, even though I can tell this is photoshopped because the text is not aligning correctly, this looks like a Surfans or a Surfans brand audio player. And this is for audiophiles, and so this thing is going to be several $100s. I should have gotten a price point to go with this, but this is going to be super expensive even in today's money. And this is for the audiophile set, and by audiophiles I mean the kind who have don't even blink at dropping $5,000 or $10,000 on a studio setup, or for a specific phonograph or turntable, or in-ear monitors. Really expensive. Well, they're different than earbuds, but who have no problem dropping extreme amounts of money. And so audiophiles demand, even though we're talking about audio players, and so we have the iPod over here on the top right, and we have this model here. The category is audio players. However, we have two different user bases here. You have I hesitate to say casual listener who rather the user who finds the iPod more than sufficient for their needs. But then we also have a user who requires the hardware and the software to play lossless audio files flawlessly. And so this would be appropriate for that user. And so same product category, different user base. Therefore, the user base, that user base requires different aesthetics and a different level of minimalism. And so we have several ports here going on that we don't see in the iPod, and we have more controls here that we don't see on the iPod. And so you have to bear in mind that listen to your user base. That is to say, do your user research to make sure that you create a product that they want, and make it as as minimal and as minimal as possible, and use only the aesthetics that are necessary. And lastly, this is not a photo that I took, although I'm sure I've mentioned this a billion times. I was a veterinary nurse for about 12 years, and so everything in this picture is very. I understand everything I'm looking at right here. Very common sight. And so I chose this picture not because of the cute dog with the paw that's, or the leg that's the forelimb that's healing up there, but because I want to briefly talk about the heating system that's going on here. And so we have a couple things to look at. So you'll see this this blue hose coming up, and it has an interface here on the cage, and it has sort of a mirror of this on the other side. You just can't see it because of the bars. And then there is this this yellow inflatable, it's not a bag, but this yellow inflatable bit that you see here that goes, it's sort of lying on top of the dog. And so when the last time I was a nurse, we had one of these systems, and it was called a bear hugger. And I can't tell what this says on the side, but we had one, and ours was called a bear hugger. And if you follow this hose down, it connects to basically what looks like kind of looks like a vacuum cleaner in a way, but it blows heated air through this tube, which is flexible, and into this inflatable. It can be made of anything really, but this sort of inflatable bag, so to speak. It's not a bag, but and then there's similar to a air hockey table. There's like thousands of tiny little holes in this bag, and so warm air will sort of will go all over the patient to gently warm them up. And I'm guessing this is usually it's used during surgery or after surgery, or because during surgery and after surgery it's very difficult, or it can be difficult, to maintain patient temperature. And so one of the things we would frequently do is throw a bear hugger or throw a warmer on our patients after surgery. And so I'm guessing that's what's going on here. This system, so the idea is good. The execution on these things is so horrible, and I this is the first thing that I thought of when I thought about aesthetic and minimal design, because these things are the worst things to use ever. Like I said, the idea is fantastic. However, the interface you see right here with the darker blue bit connecting to the hose port right here is exactly the same thing on the other side of the cage. So the issue is, if you can imagine, you see this cage door is like 30 degrees open. When you open this cage door all the way, this warming sack will start to, it goes, because it's connected to the cage, it starts going with the cage. And so it is almost impossible to get it stationed the right way. And then if the patient moves around or whatever, and they get out from under it, you have to open it up, and you have to spend forever getting it exactly where it needs to be. and they're always over-engineered, and they're also super expensive, which I don't understand. But they're over-engineered and they're super expensive, and knowing what I know now, like I complained about it when I was a veterinary nurse, but knowing what I know now, I'm taking even further aback about the complete lack of minimal. This is minimalism gone too far. Like this is minimalism gone berserk, and almost to the point where I feel like this wasn't even tested that much. And so the point of that little story is to test, and make sure your user base is good with the decisions that you've made. Do split testing if necessary, A/B testing, and come up with a product that works in the real world, not in a sort of fantasized environment where I am almost positive that we called it a bear hugger, where not in a fantasized environment where a non-lab scenario or a non-clinical scenario where I'm sure the bear hugger was developed, because this thing was awful. We had to use it. We had no other option. But yeah, doctors hated it, staff hated it. It was the worst. Anyway, moving on, almost to the end here. I think this is slide 9 of 10. We have a heuristic here. Help users recognize, diagnose, and recover from errors. And you've noticed so far that a lot of these heuristics have been about errors, and errors are indeed a very big deal. And so, as I stated in one of the first slides, users are going to err. That's going to happen. And the more complex your product is, the more avenues you have for errors to occur. There are more avenues for errors to occur. And so even if you've done a fantastic job of setting up constraints and done everything you can to prevent errors from occurring, they're going to happen. And so when errors do occur, you need to, as it says here, help users recognize, diagnose, and recover from errors. And in other words, use plain language for error messages. And just, if you don't take away anything else from this long stream, use plain language can be applied to so many different things. Just use plain language. Be specific with what you mean, and just don't keep the user in the dark. And this sort of ties in with the system status heuristic. And so I have two examples of terrible error messages on the left. And when I was at Google image search looking for error messages, I started typing like error message, and it auto completed for me. And one of the top suggestions was Chase error message, and this is the Chase logo, which is a bank here, or it's a national bank, might even be international. But apparently Chase was famous or infamous at some point for having just these horrible error messages, and it says, "Oops, something went wrong. Please try again later." So this just fails, and it has OK at the bottom. So this just fails on so many levels. And so this, "Oops, something went wrong." Okay, so oops is a bit cutesy for an error message, and you see that a lot when you have brands that try to be very friendly and very pally with you. And I hate those kind of error messages, because they're not helpful, and they have I think they're trying to be sometimes. If you reach a 404 page or get like a 503 error when you're navigating a website, and they say like, "Ah, shucks, something went wrong, page isn't found," and they're trying to be like chummy or cute, and I find that it has the opposite effect on me. I find it enraging. Just tell me what the error is and how to fix it. That's all I care about. I'm here for the content, not for your mascot with like a dopey face apologizing that the resource wasn't found. And so, oops, something went wrong. Something went wrong. Obviously, it doesn't say what went wrong, so this is completely worthless. If you were trying to speak to a customer service agent and you gave them this information, that probably wouldn't be that helpful to them either. And then, "Please try again later," is again just worthless text. And it's just this is confounding and baffling to users. And then just the OK down here, and sort of like maybe a tertiary button style, just sort of an admission of sort of like not board failure, but just sort of like giving up, just like, "Oh, okay, fine." And so Chase failed for. Hopefully they've changed their design since then, but this is just It's just a parade of errors right here. And then we have another one, and of course, I tried to minimize the number of Windows-based errors I found looking online because it's passe to diss on Windows. But this is, I started using Windows right when Windows 95 was brand new, so many moons ago. And they've gotten better over time, but sometimes you would just get the most cryptic error messages sometimes in Windows regarding system problems, and this would be an example of that. So, the title of this error is error, and it lets you know that an error occurred, which is further backed up by the X iconography here. And then I love the just again, comedy of errors. The two options we have, which is OK or cancel, which again, OK, this microcopy here sort of has the same feeling as this OK right here, but then what does cancel mean in this scenario? Can I cancel out of the error? What am I being told here? What is the point of this? And again, if you were trying to relay this error to somebody, how like this doesn't tell anybody anything. And so this is an example of how not to use error, because again, an error occurred is sort of odd phrasing. And so that's definitely not plain language. And then, oops, something went wrong is too far. It's too far in the other direction for plain language, in that it's also not helpful, but for different reasons. And so, yeah, be clear and offer solutions where possible. Neither of these are clear, and I would go so far as to say, please try again later is not a solution. That's not helping the user right now. And I don't know what website I got this from, but I wanted to include an example of what good error messages look like, because as stated multiple times now, users are going to err, and so make it as soft as possible and help them recover from it as quick as possible. And the best way to help them recover, the best way to help users recover from an error, is to explain what happened and, in the same breath, tell them how to fix it. And so this is a fantastic example of what that looks like. And so this looks like it's e-commerce, I'm guessing, or not necessarily e-commerce, but it's a website or part of an app where a user can purchase something, and it looks like they can set their own price. However, we have an error here. We can see that the user in the screenshot made an error because they entered $2. $2 United States dollars, but the error is the chosen price must be at least $5. And so we have some color recognition here. We can see that there's a sort of pink salmon color for error, which corresponds to this error right here, this color right here. And there's also this dark red stroke, which sort of draws further attention. And as far as accessibility is concerned, this could probably maybe be improved a little bit more, like if there were an icon right here of an exclamation point or something, or a stop sign, and then having the same iconography here would improve accessibility. And I will say that this is a good error message, because not only does it explain the error, it also gives the solution. If you're watching this, you may be thinking, this error could have been prevented in the first place. And so how would we have prevented this error from occurring? Well, we could have provided some hint text below the label here that would have said something along the lines of minimum $5. And so if the user, and there's no guarantee that the user is going to see that, of course. However, that would have saved at least maybe one or two. That would have saved some users the hassle of setting it inappropriate or a price too low, clicking add to cart, and then having to deal with an error message. And so re-entering the price, re-clicking, it would have saved some effort. And not all users would have seen it, but some users would have. And so this was an opportunity where error prevention could have been instituted a bit here. However, while they failed on error prevention, this is an example of succeeding at having a good error message, plain language, clear solution. And so this failed on one part, succeeded at another. And you'll see here, yeah, so this is the last heuristic, and this is on help and documentation. And the alternate wording for that is provide focused, concise help at the right time and place. And this, again, all this is sort of tied together. And one of the overarching themes so far with these usability heuristics, and I should have pointed out at the beginning, although this deals with 10 usability heuristics, there are literally hundreds of heuristics depending on what sort of product or project you're working on. And so do not think that it's limited to just these 10. This is just like the 10 broadest heuristics that apply to the most products. E-commerce has their own heuristics, and back-end or CMS products have their own heuristics, and regardless of what you're working on, they have their own category of rules of thumb. So do not think that it's just limited to these 10. But the last heuristic is it regards help and documentation. And the idea is just in the scenario, so users are going to err at some point. Users are probably going to need assistance at some point as well. And there are multiple ways of providing assistance, and it's not always so in help and documentation. The way this is phrased, it makes it sound like this is concentrating solely on just the help portion, when that isn't the entire case. Documentation is very frequently found in the form of site tours or app tours, wizards, tutorials, templates, things like that. And so help is pretty obvious as to what help might be obvious as to what it's referring to, but documentation, because it's so close to help, sort of gives you the idea that it might be just like an FAQ. FAQ would be documentation, but it's not always having to do with help. It might also be an introduction about how something works. And so, for example, I took this screenshot right here, and this is I don't know what app this is. However, this is the onboarding phase for a mobile app. And maybe it's for an app called OneUp, or I'm not sure. But through these 3 screens, it informs the user of what they can do with the app, and it also informs the user that there's no hidden charges or fees. And so it answers by doing this very brief onboarding. These 3 brief onboarding screens, it answers many of the questions that users may have, and user research may have indicated that these are the 3 biggest questions that users often have about this app. And so by addressing these issues at the very beginning, this company may have again saved themselves some time and some effort having to answer emails wondering exactly how this thing works or what it's for. And so this is an example of sort of maybe combination help and documentation, more on the documentation side. And you may notice something interesting, and very much appreciate this. So the primary button here is next, of course, so we can go through these 3 screens. But there's also an option for skip, and that is huge, because it would be incorrect to assume that the user who begins to use this app has never used it before. The user could have gotten a new mobile device, for example, and is re-downloading all of their apps, and it doesn't have their phone set up to where it knows who they are. It knows it's a new phone, so that it logs in automatically. And so if they download an app for the second time, but they're very familiar with how to use it, they might want to skip this information. And so this is an example of giving control to the user, or allowing the user to feel like they're in control. And it's just small things like this that definitely help out. And it's, that goes a long way psychologically. And as far as other help is concerned, I took this little screenshot of the Call Us and live chat from AppMex, where one can purchase precious metals. This is at the very top of the page, not the very top, but this is in the first quarter of the page. And they give their phone number, and they also have an option for live chat. And actually, I could just go to the website and show you what I'm talking about. Let's go to AppMex. And so we can see that this is the screenshot that I took. No, go away, honey. This is the screenshot that I took right here. And so their their phone number is right here, and so we have immediate access to their phone number. And so if you're an impatient customer, or you're frustrated with something in the checkout process, you can give them a ring right then and there. And so they make it very easy to get in touch with them, which is helpful for services like this, because very often people may spend thousands, tens of thousands, possibly more money than that at a time on a website like this. And so it looks like, well, that's interesting. So live chat has disappeared. I took that screenshot much earlier in the day when it was still working hours. And so since AppMex is now closed, they removed the live chat. So that's pretty cool. And, okay, that is interesting. So they removed the live chat option right here. And then this image right here with the, again, I'm guessing this is for live chat, that was hovering right here in the bottom right, and it scrolled with you when you were scrolling through the website. And so it's interesting that also disappeared. So I guess they mean it when they say live chat. And so by giving the users, it also gives the user options and flexibility in how they want to receive help or receive help. And so if they're more comfortable with speaking to someone over the phone, they have the option to call. Or if it makes more sense for the user to use the live chat feature, that function is also available. And it also, live chats, again, it was here in the top right in this area right here, right above the site ID, but there was also this icon right here in the bottom right. So they showed it to the user twice in two different ways, and so they were sort of covering your bases there. So very, very smart with AppMex. And some of our users of early Windows, of early Word might recall this little gentleman, or I'm not sure if it's a boy or not. This is Clippy, and Clippy was the mascot for early editions of Office. And Clippy existed as sort of very, I wouldn't even say AI, it was a primitive digital assistant. And it says right here, "Hi, I'm Clippy, your office assistant. Would you like some assistance today?" Good job repeating that word twice. And Clippy would appear whenever you started a document of any kind, really. And as you were writing, it would sort of, in its very primitive way, pay attention to what you were writing and try to come up with a way to assist you in writing. And so if you started out your letter, "Dear Susan," Clippy might appear and say, "Oh, looks like you're sending a letter there. Would you like some assistance with how to format, possibly a personal letter?" And thankfully, our technology has gotten better since then. However, this is an example of providing sort of help and documentation at the same time. And of course, you could turn them off, which I think 99% of people did. But this is this is an example of help from from some of our earlier years. And then lastly, documentation. And documentation is an area where you want to provide the users with adequate documentation, especially at the beginning of their journey, in order for them to accomplish whatever task is ahead of or in front of them as quickly as possible without having to ask you, the designer, or ask the company for assistance, because that is a drain on resources. And so I took this screenshot here from Figma, and whenever I'm in the recents or drafts portion of Figma, I have the option, this is I guess I could close it. Yeah, I never do. It shows me some templates to use in FigJam, which is super useful. And I think I've actually clicked on, I will go into other people's FigJam with some regularity, but I've never created my own FigJam. But if I wanted to, I know that I don't have to start from zero. I know that I can, for example, if I was working on a persona and I needed some collaboration with that, I could click the user personas and we could start collaborating that way. And this is a form of documentation that would allow me to, tutorials and templates, again, forms of documentation. These templates would allow me to, as the user, to get started quickly and to be headed in the right direction based on whatever goal I had. And of course, you see this all over the place, or you see templates like the ones you see here on numerous sites. For example, if you go to Miro, which will load up in a second here. Miro, yeah, and you can't close this. Under their create a board headline, they have recommended templates. And so that's also where they have their new board option here. But if you wanted to create a mind map or a Kanban framework or retrospective, product roadmap, flowchart, visual table, or whatever the case may be, and then they have community templates, which there's probably hundreds, if not thousands, of different templates available here that would assist you in getting started. And so this is an example of really good documentation that you see pretty frequently these days, at least in your design, your design applications. And let's see here. I think that is the last slide as far as usability heuristics are concerned. And so I definitely hope that you got something out of this and hopefully learned a bit about usability heuristics, when they're appropriate, when to think about them, and what to take into account when you're doing your design. And I suspect that if you took this to heart, that you might start critiquing subconsciously other designs that you see for their heuristics. And of course, there's been so much written about heuristics, and again, not just these 10, but each category of product and project has its own heuristics to look into. And so that's definitely something that you could spend hours learning about different heuristics, which I would definitely suggest that you do. And lastly, I did want to mention that so Twitch, of course, because I am not an affiliate, does delete all videos, all streams after a certain amount of time. And so I record, or I download the recordings of all of my streams and I post them on my YouTube page. And for the last month and a half, something like that, I've also been creating some more bite-size videos, 8 to 15 minutes long, something like that, covering, at least for now, the very basics of Figma for beginners. And I wanted to, at the very least, provide a QR link for how to get to my YouTube website. It's called Show Me UX, because I'm in the Show Me state. And if you follow this link here, you will see the playlist for all of the Twitch streams. There's about maybe 13 or 14 hours worth of content at this point, as well as some, I'm not sure why I said professional vids, but some videos that require a lot more production value to them, mostly beginning Figma, very basics of Figma. And so if you want to go ahead and check that out, of course, like, comment, and subscribe. You know how YouTube works. And yeah, that is it for this evening. I hope everyone enjoyed this Tuesday evening stream. Of course, if you have any questions or concerns, you know to reach me on Discord, Slack, and Skype. And if you know where I am, you know where I am. Otherwise, you can subscribe to me on Twitch and sign up for notifications to be alerted whenever I go live. And yeah, that's all for this evening. See you this Friday.